I strongly believe that listening to player feedback will make your game better. But what if you're not yet getting any player feedback? What if your game's not yet fully released or was launched to a very few players? How do you get that feedback loop started that you need to improve your game? I'm going to offer you 3 tips in my talk today. But first, about me, I run Feature Upvote, which is a platform for managing player feedback. It's very helpful when you're getting so much feedback you're almost drowning in it. It's used by V-Rising and Shrouded, June Spice Wars, and plenty of other games, including many indie games. And I host the Community Lounge podcast. If you're in the community management side of the gaming industry, you should be listening to that podcast. Okay, back to the topic, how to get player feedback. My 3 tips are simple. Ask, make it easy, and acknowledge. And I'm going to go into a bit of detail for all 3 of those one by one. First, ask. This may seem so obvious. It may seem even ridiculous to you that I'm saying you need to ask. But you'll be surprised how many people overlook this. They share the game, they release the game, but they're not clearly asking players to give them feedback. Let's look at one example of how you might ask for feedback. Let's say your game's still under development and you're sharing it with an acquaintance, a friend, somebody you met at a meetup. Rather than just sending them the link to the game and telling them to enjoy it, make sure that you're asking clearly for feedback. In this example mail, you can see that half the entire email is dedicated to just asking for feedback. And look how simply and clearly I'm asking for it. I think that's 9 words. That's as complicated as you should be asking. You need to ask repeatedly. Now, this means 2 things. It means over all the channels. So if you've got a Steam page already, you need to be asking there, on your own website, in any marketing newsletter, in-game, and so on, or via personal emails like this. But repeatedly also means you need to be asking the same people over and over. You see, we're all getting asked for feedback and reviews for almost every service and product we use these days, and we've kind of learnt just to ignore those emails. Well, at least I have. I assume you're the same. So go back to let's keep with this scenario where I'm writing to Joe asking him to give me feedback. If I don't hear from Joe, I'm going to write again 3 days later, and I'm going to ask for feedback slightly reworded. Please let me know what you liked and what you didn't like. And then if another week passes and I still haven't heard from Joe, I'm going to ask even more directly. I'm using feedback to make the game better. What could be improved in the game? And at this point, I'd probably stop asking if I don't get any response from Joe, because this is verging on being annoying. But the principle I'm trying to show here is you need to ask multiple times. One of the reasons for having to ask repeatedly is not just because people might not get around to it or to playing your game or giving you feedback, but they might not actually have any feedback at first. They have feedback if there's some really positive experience or some really negative experience. That's the moments in which they want to tell you about the game or about what they think about it. And it might take the 3rd or 5th time playing it until they find that a boss is too difficult, or a weapon is unbalanced, or a map is confusing. This is why you need to ask repeatedly. Now, asking in the right place, this is a bit tricky. Ideally, you would ask at exactly the time in which the player is suffering some type of frustration or something good is happening. You could ask in-game, but I think that's going to be kind of annoying and is going to do more harm than good. But you could ask in your opening screen, your pause screen, or when the player quits the game. Perhaps you could open a browser and open a tab in their browser that goes to your feedback page. Something like that. What works exactly depends on how you approach things and your game and the platform you're using. But you've got to, you're going to improve the chance of getting feedback if you ask in the right place. And the most powerful of all is asking personally. And that goes back to the sample email I showed when I was writing to a fictional person called Joe about a fictional game. If you ask somebody personally, I would estimate you're about 10 times as likely to actually get feedback as opposed to writing to some mailing list, which means when you're asking if there's a way you can indicate that it is personal, make sure you do it, coming from your own personal email address, or making sure there's something in the email that shows that this is not auto-generated. So with Joe, I would be writing something like, "Hey Joe, nice meeting you at the meetup on Monday night," and then I'll continue with the email. So that's ask. Tip 2 is to make it easy. Now the general rule here is if you make giving you feedback complicated, you won't get any feedback. If you make it simple, you will get feedback. It's kind of a continuum, but in general, Any barrier you put in the way of people being able to give you feedback is going to hurt you. So the implication of that is a simple web form is good. Something like Google Forms, something where people don't need to sign up for a service or an account. I like Google Forms for that because I think these days you can assume that anybody playing with your game has a Google account and therefore they won't need to sign into Google Forms. You might be a little bit surprised that I say prefer Google Forms over Discord. The reason for this is, look, you're in the gaming industry. You're probably on Discord all day. Most of your players aren't. And of those players who are on Discord, not many of them are on your server. And of those who are on your server, not many of them actually want to write something publicly or get the feel for how your server is structured and what channel to use. So accept feedback over Discord, that's fine, but don't make it your principal means of getting feedback. If you do, you will bias your feedback towards a certain type of player and you will dramatically reduce the amount of feedback you get. Email is fine, especially if you've written to someone via email, let them reply via email. It's not your player's job to find the right channel and to do everything the way that suits you. You need to make it easy for them to give you feedback in any channel they can, and then it's up to you to put that into whatever system you're using. This is an example of what I think is a really good form for collecting player feedback. I have to make a disclaimer. I actually designed this. It's from my platform feature upvote as used by one of our customers, Timberborn. There's a title field which is required, but notice how it has a 100 character limit. This forces people to write short, snappy descriptions of what the problem is. You're going to be grateful for this. There's a description field, which is optional, which allows up to 1,000 characters. Don't make people write in there if they don't want to. Sometimes the title's enough. Like, can't get past boss on level 3. Maybe you don't need more description. But I also put a 1,000 character limit there because what you don't want is people writing you endless pages of feedback. That is not helpful. You won't use it. You want to make sure that people know there's a limit to how much they need to write. And they can add an image, a screenshot if they want. A screenshot is worth 1,000 words. It's great if you can get it. And name and email we make required just because we want to be able to communicate with the person afterwards. Notice what we're not asking for. We're not asking for platform. We're not asking for build number. We're not asking for screen resolution. We're not asking for localization. Although this stuff will help you, it's going to be barriers in the way of people giving you feedback. Every time you add one of these required fields, the amount of feedback you get will drop. You can always write to somebody one-on-one if you need to get additional information like that. In general, don't ask for that stuff. And that moves us on to tip 3. So tip 1 was ask, tip 2 was make it easy, and tip 3 is acknowledge. If somebody sends you feedback and they hear nothing from you about it ever, they're going to assume they send it to a black hole. They will be very unlikely to send you any more feedback. So you need to, at the very minimum, especially in the days when you're not getting any feedback and you're trying to get the feedback loop started, you need to thank them. A personal thank you is what I recommend. In this case, a very short email. Hi, Joe, thanks for the feedback. It's really helpful. It's short. It's acknowledging they gave you feedback, but it's not making any promises. Don't make promises about when you get feedback. Okay, the next part of acknowledging actually requires you to do something. You need to gather the feedback you've got and find something to fix. Now, here's something you're going to discover when you start collecting feedback. At first, say you get 10 pieces of feedback, 5 of them are all going to be reporting the same problem, even more. There's going to be some big problem or barrier or headache in your game that's affecting almost everybody, and that's just going to get reported over and over and over. And this is part of why you need to get feedback to make your game better. It's identifying that big problem. Fix it, do another release, and write individually to the people who reported that problem. They don't know that they were one of 5 people reporting the problem. All they know is that they reported something, you fixed it or changed it, and now you're telling them. They are going to turn from a player into a fan, and maybe even an ambassador. And in your release notes, also make sure you thank all the people who reported that problem. You can actually thank all the people who gave you feedback if it's a small number, but at the very least, all the people who reported the problem or the issue that you fixed. Thank them by first name or by player handle. You don't have to do the full name. They all know it's them. And again, you're going to turn players into fans and into ambassadors, the best thing you want for your game. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's not actually easy to get player feedback, but With these 3 tips, you will maximize the chance of getting that feedback loop started so that you can make a better game.